dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll.
Hello, Matt.
them dice.
Hey, Rob, it's Blades in the Dark. Let's fucking go.
Let's fucking go. It's Blades in the Dark. Hello, everyone. This is Blade Master of None. Well, it's Dungeon Master of None, but today we're doing something a little different. We're talking about a different system. Wow, weird, crazy. We've done this before, though, right? This isn't the first time.
No,
Yeah.
of course not. I mean, while our listeners, you know, we're rolling up monsters in the 5e manual and studying economics and picking up people of the preferred or genders, we were studying the blade.
We were studying the Blades in the Dark. That's right. That's right. While you were having premarital sex,
Right.
We studied Blades in the Dark.
I forgot how ridiculous that post was.
It's so much dumber than you could possibly imagine.
It's been Xeroxed so many times by the internet. I forgot how dumb it was. Okay. Well, cool. We're doing a different system.
That's right. And there's a lot, I think, well, one, it's cool and it's fun. And I think everybody should play it because it's easy. But also, I think there's a lot to learn from this in terms of both world building and DM advice. We're going to split this into two because there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to talk about the system itself and the world and some of the games that Matt and I ran in Blades in the Dark. And then our second episode, we're going to talk about what you can learn from the GM advice section of this, which I honestly think is one of the best I've ever read. It's got just jam-packed full of wisdom. Really, really good stuff for running games.
We said maybe like Dungeon World has one of the best Dungeon Master advice sections, but that's wrong. It might be this book. And if you're one of those listeners of ours who your group will only ever play 5e or something similar, that's okay. Listen to this episode, learn a little bit about the game system in the world, and then stay tuned for our next one where you'll get just general game master advice that works for almost any system, I think.
Yeah, this is its own distinct system, but it also comes with a very, very distinct world, and there's a lot of world building, good world building to be learned from this. And there's a lot of things that you can steal or borrow, even if you don't intend to use the system itself. It's popular for a reason. It's really well done. This is one of my favorite. What are we going to call this? I guess it's like a narrative first type of RPG, but that kind of does it a disservice because it's different from a lot of the other what you might call narrative RPGs, but it's
on the narrative side of the narrative simulationist divide, if you will. But does that matter so much? Not as we get into it, there's not stats for different size knives, if that's what you're wondering.
That's right.
And if that's a deal breaker for you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and as somebody who loves a table full of stats, I did miss it, but there's a satisfying amount of crunch in this game despite being relatively rules light, which I'll talk about, and I was delighted, or I am delighted by how this has worked out. So I think there's a lot going on here, and I've been consistently very impressed by Blades in the Dark.
Yeah, and I guess just to situate our listeners, so Blades in the Dark, I think came out 5 years as of this recording before. It's by John Harper, who did Lasers and Feelings, inspiring a billion different hacks of 2 words for a one-page RPG. But this is no one-page RPG. Rule book and setting information clock in at nearly 300 pages. And speaking of clocks, we got lots of them.
Lots of clocks, that's right.
Lots of clocks.
Speaking of things you can steal, clocks are great. 2017. So this is just 5 years old, and it's taken the role-playing game world by storm. It's very, very popular.
And it has some very
to measure these things.
Who knows? What's the size of its subreddit? I will not look.
It doesn't matter. RPG subreddits are a disaster, by the way. Short tangent here. I have used Reddit for a long time to my detriment because it for the types of information that I need to know, it's a useful forum, and there are some nice places there. Role-playing game subreddits are divided into exclusively meme subreddits, which are full of bad, not funny memes, and I'm just going to categorize them as grognard subreddits, just subreddits full of angry, aging men who are frustrated about things, and there really is no in between, and there's very little of value that is discussed on Reddit.
It's really frustrating
TTRPGs,
about the Reddit thing, and you're like forced to use it now. If you're like trying to find like a fix for your, I don't know, television Roku hookup or something, you have to add like Reddit 2021 or 2022 to your source.
Fine.
Otherwise, you're gonna find the wrong information.
That's right. Reddit is now the fixing Google's SEO problem, but also then you have to be on Reddit, which is a nightmare. Anyway, back to the topic at hand.
Right. There's some. This game has an interesting lineage, I would say. So I think when it first came out, I wrongly thought it was like an apocalypse world game, which I've played enough of and run enough of. I was like, oh, that's fine. But it's actually,
I made this mistake until I looked at it more closely, which I like Powered by the Apocalypse, but this is not that. This shares some similarities, but it is not a PBTA game. It is its own animal.
Right. And it is, I mean, if there's any game that is the like direct ancestor of this one, it's definitely, Powered by the Apocalypse. But as Rob was saying, it's different enough. Clocks are still there and playbooks are still there. But other than that, and some general kind of feels, it is really its own system. So much so that if you're looking for something that's free, Forge in the Dark has its own SRD. There are several other games that have used the rules system. That's how much people like it. I think the most successful one is Scum and Villainy, which is kind of your generic scoundrels in space role-playing game. But yeah, there's a lot of games that have used the system and more coming out.
Yeah, so we should clarify what Blades in the Dark is, because it's really two things. And Matt has just described there is a system, the rules, the mechanisms by which the RPG plays. There is also a setting and I guess you call a style of play, which is inherent to Blades in the Dark. And they're clearly not like inseparable, because as Matt just mentioned, there's Scum and Villainy, there's Band of Blades, there's Girl by Moonlight, there's other Forged in the Dark systems. But, but at its core, Blades in the Dark and the setting and the style of play are very inextricably linked, and we're going to go into detail about that. It's much like, for example, Shadowrun. The system itself can be removed and reworked, but it really is kind of designed around a specific place and a specific type of game.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the strengths of this system is that, like, God, the mechanics and the setting are both great, and they both work beautifully together. So let's do a quick intro into what the setting is for Blades in the Dark.
So
let's head to Doskvol.
So this is great. This is maybe like the best part of Blades in the Dark. It's so well articulated, the setting is, despite not having, there's no like 100-page like fact book about Doskvol. There's a few pages here and there, but the setting just sort of like drips off the pages. This is, I think, what John Harper does the best. And it's worth saying that if this doesn't appeal to you, Blades in the Dark may not be that exciting, but even this isn't really even my like most favorite type of game to play, and I loved it. And so it's dark fantasy, steampunk. The way that I'm not going to read you the whole setting blurb, but the final sentence is you're in a haunted Victorian-era city trapped inside a wall of lightning powered by demon blood. It's dark, it's gritty, it's a fallen world, it's full of the supernatural, and it's, ex-punk of one type or another. It's great.
Yeah, it's time to break out your Cockney accents because
right.
we're headed
right.
to.
This is where you've been practicing that Cockney accent. This is the lower and dirtier your London accent, the better it'll fit into Blades in the Dark. Just watch every watch every Guy Ritchie movie that you can get your hands on and copy the most incomprehensible one. You got it. You got the feel down pat.
Yeah, Guy Ritchie movies not listed on the inspiration here, but God, they work very well because your player characters will inevitably be as stupid as the Guy Ritchie protagonist, and that's great. It works perfectly for this type of movie. It's funny. I think I read that before this episode that John Harper is working on another version of this, tentatively titled Ride or Die. That is going to be a Fast and Furious style heist movie.
That sounds
because
so
good.
Good.
This city and this game, again, mechanics and setting working together, is built around heists. Right.
That's the second part, or the third part, I guess, that's the setting, but the game, your characters, your crew, they're doing a heist. So again, a lot like Shadowrun, you can play differently, but really the structure of the game tends to lean on you're doing a heist or something heist-like every session.
Yeah. And a little bit more about this beautiful setting.
Let's
you're in a city with
setting,
with lightning powered walls fueled by demon blood, and you'll be thankful for those lightning powered walls fueled by demon blood because there's terrible ghosts on the outside, and this is a setting that takes place 1,000 years after some unknown cataclysm that basically destroyed the world, covered it in cloud and darkness, maybe blotted out the sun, severed connections to the gods. And people are
Unleashed
still
demons on the world, or more demons.
Terrible, awful demons everywhere, and people have adapted. There's an awful empire of which you live in one of its many beating hearts, and it sustains itself by hunting some of those demons, which are like giant whales in the ocean in which you can see the stars, even though there's no stars in the sky. Very creepy. You distill down a demon blood, and we have all done this before, and then you can turn it into cool Magitech fuel that you can use to keep the supernatural elements at bay and do all sorts of other fun things, like grow, potatoes and millet and stuff. Because there's no sun, you might starve.
Shoot lightning and create weird alchemical compounds, and also grow food, sustain life, that sort of thing. There's automatons created from this, and it's there's what I love about what this shares with all of my favorite settings rather is that it gives you more than enough to work with, but it doesn't tell you everything, right? There's so much room for you and your players to explore here, but there's just so many interesting things for you to latch onto. There's just regular old gang intrigue with a bunch of really interesting criminal organizations. There's also corrupt government and crooked cops and weird
evil cults,
so many evil cults.
Tyrannical captains of industry.
That's right. Yes. This is a very kind of working class game. It's not exactly a socialist revolution kind of game. You're a criminal doing crimes, but you're very much on the bottom rung of society, and everybody at the top is a shithead, just like they are in real life.
Yep. And basically talking a little more about the city, right? So there's this whole world, but it's focused on this one city, which is expressed in the perfect amount of detail. And every faction and neighborhood and interesting location is just ripe for a heist. Everything is super dangerous and crazy, but, you know, the player characters are just the crazy, dangerous people to, I don't know, steal some ancient artifact from, you know, the masked, like, people who kill the ghosts that get through the wall.
Right.
Or, you know, steal some alchemical research from the corrupt university. Or, you know, steal a bunch of gold from a Leviathan ship captain.
And, you know, the city is described as London, Venice, Prague, lots of row houses close together, twisting streets, canals running through it. This is a port city where those aforementioned Leviathan hunters come back with their ships full of demon blood, so there's lots of commerce running through it, which you can already imagine makes for perfect heist opportunities, either leaping from rooftops or climbing up through second stories or escaping through the canals or delving through catacombs or leading chases through these twisting streets. It's just beautifully designed to encourage that kind of heist thinking. And like Matt said, there's just so many different targets, so many different types of people to interact with in one way or another. It's beautifully done. It's a great place. Immediately the mind just flourishes with adventure ideas. And
if you're like needing more adventure ideas, the like city book section of this has like a beautiful like 2 pages on every neighborhood in the city, which they all have a like cool distinct feel. It reminds me of some of my favorite city books from other settings, right? There's a couple interesting locations, a brief blurb on what the streets here feel like, and some like plot hooks, and that's all you need. Plus, I mean, there's just a ton of factions. Every faction is interesting, and there is more of them than you will ever use in one campaign. And you know, there's just a great playground. If you're not into even like dark Victorian stuff, the fun thing about these factions is if you have any kind of setting where there's like magic and or corruption, 90% of the factions can be like ported over, no problem.
All of these factions would fit really well in any city campaign. And this is something else that I love about it. I've been saying forever that I love city-based campaigns in any RPG. I think it's just great to let your players get to know and spend some time in a distinct geographic area, but also allow them enough room to explore and give them lots of people and things to interact with, and these types of cities are perfect for that. This is also a great example of what we've talked about before, is following through on what the implications of your, you know, the unique fantasy or science fiction elements of your world would indicate. So there's no sun. The world has been either moved or cut off, or the sun's been destroyed or something. And this means, of course, that for the most part, ordinary plants don't grow. So everybody eats mushrooms or fungus or eels that come in from the void sea. And there are, you know, some places where they use magical lights to grow actual wheat to make bread for rich people. But for the most part, everyone's eating mushroom loaf and eel pie, which is just, you know, just a perfect touch, you know?
I know. When I read the intro and there's no sun, I was immediately like, well, how's everyone have food? But there's a lovely, like 1-pager on what does everyone eat in Doskvol.
And that's all you need. Is it? Yes, of course. Does it, you know, fall apart if you think about it too hard? Probably. But it answers the question. It's not just like letting you figure out what people eat when nothing grows. You know, it only needs a few paragraphs to talk about mushroom gardens and and eel farms and all that. It's that simple. It's a great, just very well done, just the perfect amount of information at every point.
And this is, make no doubt about it, despite the steampunky Victorian feel, a fantasy setting.
Yes.
There's lovely details about how ghosts operate, different types of ghosts you could encounter, kind of new ghosts that are more like people that you could talk to, ghosts that have gone like crazy and are terrifying monsters that you have to escape from or fight. Demons, which are creatures kind of not of this world that have crazy elemental powers. Forgotten gods, which are, can range from weird angels to Cthulhu monsters that you can throw in there. And you add the magic tech stuff here. You've got all this fun alchemical stuff. Rob already mentioned there's like ghost robots. Hello, Dr. Venture. I am Ghost Robot. That's my favorite character from. Some people find my voice and intonation annoying.
So there's this really excellent setting, and you're given a lot of different things to work with, but the core of the game is about your crew doing heists. And this is where the system comes into play and where it becomes really distinct and interesting, because this is not unique to Blades in the Dark, but it's really well done here. The consistent character for the game, for your campaign, is the crew. Your players are all going to have individual characters, but they're even kind of encouraged to either retire or swap them out or have more than one, both because the game can be quite deadly and also because they're going to get fucked up and need some time off, or want to retire after they've...
Or just let their character die at a dramatic moment.
Exactly.
And not feel bad about that because the crew always has more members.
The crew will bring someone new on. And there's a list of inspirations, really good inspirations at the beginning, which are worth reviewing when thinking about this type of setting. But the way that the system in the game is structured, it feels exactly like you are running an Ocean's 11 style heist every single time. And down to the overly elaborate plans and the, crew of misfits with, different skills that they bring to the table. It's, again, I have run and played in Shadowrun campaigns for a long time, which are also heist focused and I've loved, but I have to admit that the heist element of Blades in the Dark is just head and shoulders above what Shadowrun encourages and allows for. It's it blew me away.
Yeah. Now that we get into the mechanics, I'm trying to think of what's the best way to approach this. I think there's basically 3 parts to the system of Forged in the Dark. And one is the basic gameplay loop of heists. 2, we can talk about what sort of roles exist and how dice resolution works in this campaign. And then we can come back to those super cool crews and the player playbooks, which are all fairly neat.
Well, let's talk about the core system and the dice rolls so people understand what we're talking about. And then I think it would be worth talking about the core gameplay loop, because I think that's the most interesting part and also probably the most useful if you're not actually going to play a Blades in the Dark campaign. But I really like the core system. And to nerd out for a minute, the core system isn't very complicated, but I think it makes you think really hard about what you're trying to accomplish in the game, and it encourages a really... I love it when the mechanics of a game encourage a type of positive interaction in terms of play, and the system for Blades in the Dark really encourages and builds collaboration between the GM and the players. It I don't want to say forces, because that's the wrong word, but mandates that collaborative storytelling that we all want and love so much in a way that is really delightful and organic.
Right. It's very hard to prep
yes.
It's easy to prep for Blades in the Dark. It's impossible to prep a specific thing.
Yes.
Right? You
and
can
we'll talk
have
about that more in the next episode when we talk about GMing, which is rewarding but challenging. But it's essentially impossible. You prep some characters, some scenarios, maybe some encounters, but for the most part, it's impossible to really, like, we joke about how hard it is in D&D, but so much more so, it is impossible to really prep for any specific eventuality in Blades in the Dark, which is both good and bad.
So what's in this loop? The loop begins with
the dice first. The dice first.
Oh,
We got to talk about how the
Well, sure. Will the dice make sense without the loop?
will the loop make sense without the dice?
Fuck. Okay, let's talk about the dice.
let's talk about the dice first, and then let's talk about the loop. So we just got to understand how things are resolved in Blades in the Dark, because it's
Right.
I think it's very simple. So you're rolling only d6s.
You're a standard 6-sided chance cube.
Yes, and much like Shadowrun, you're assembling a pool, but the you have a small number of attributes. You have a few modifiers, a very small number of modifiers, and you are looking for the single highest result. So 1 to 3 is a bad outcome, 4 to 5 is a partial success, 6 is a full success, multiples is a critical. This is incredibly simple. And there are modifiers to these rolls. You can...
Modifiers are always adding and subtracting dice.
That's right.
That core number resolution should be burned into everyone's brain. It can be modified by the dungeon master, but you're only ever adding and subtracting dice. If it's a regular attribute check, you start with the number of pips or dots you have in that attribute, and then you can add things to it.
And it's very, very difficult to get more than 1 or 2 in either direction. No matter how well prepared you are, no matter how deep your resource pool is, you're not going to be rolling more than 4 to 5 dice, even at the best of times. Most of the time, 2 to 3. And
I will point out, after we wanted to do this episode for a long time, but we waited until we had both run it. It is, if you don't have a lot of dice, if you're rolling a single die, or heaven forbid you don't have any pips and you're rolling 2 die and taking the lowest, or you're even rolling 2 die, chances of you getting fucked up are pretty bad. So players are going to be scrambling to get those extra dice every time, which is part of the magic. The game wants you to scramble for the bonus dice, which can come from assistance from another player at the cost of sharing the consequences. Oh no. They can come from pushing yourself and giving your character basically damage, stress, it's called in the system. Or they can come from you as the dungeon master or another player offering a player a devil's bargain.
which is, you get the dice, but something bad happens. You gain the attention of the bluecoats, or a vengeful ghost suddenly appears and you get their attention, or you take an injury that starts to build up. It's little things, complications, and that's what the name of this game
players
is.
are really ready to take those at the beginning, and by the end you're like, oh fuck. I know there's too many things going on. Oh no,
Right.
This heist is spinning out of control.
I've got
which is
so many
exactly...
clocks running. The bluecoats are, closing in, and there's ghosts everywhere, and my leg is, killing me, and this weird contraption that I've got is about to blow up, and suddenly everything's spinning out of control. Oh, it's so much fun. So those of you who are good at math, which is, I don't know, maybe some of you, who knows, not me, you'll probably have figured out that the most common outcome is a 4 or 5, is a partial success. And that's what's so terrific about the system. This is also one of the things that puts a little pressure on the GM, but more often than not, players are going to succeed. But there's going to be a complication. They will take damage, or they will draw attention to themselves, or something else will go wrong that then they will have to address. And this can really, like Matt said, this can really build up. And that's with things going right? If you do really poorly and roll a 1 through a 3, then things just start going to shit, and you really have to scramble to get things together. So this is what's, I think, so elegant about the system, is that even when the heist is going well, the sort of I don't know, the overall debt of bad things starts to build until you're just trying to get out with, you know, everybody intact. And the game that Matt ran for me and for my friends, you know, we accomplished the heist, but we were all injured. One of us was unconscious, and you know, we had made a lot of enemies. And in the games that I've been running,
Yes.
that's, you know, the really good heists, the ones where they're very ambitious in their targets, they get them done, but then everybody has to spend a lot of time recuperating and dealing with the consequences of those heists. It's very, very, it's designed to both encourage your players to take risks, but also to, you know, make sure that those are satisfyingly challenging. That you know, that it's not just I rest and suddenly everything's fine again, or I go to the nearest temple and get lesser restoration cast on me. You know, these are things, and the way that your character accumulates wounds and trauma over time starts to leave a mark on them, and they can continue to operate as a effective PC, but they're, you know, they're marked by the experiences that they've had. It's very, very, it's distinctly different from Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, but in a very to me, a very interesting way.
One of the other distinct differences when your players, you know, gather up their pool of D6s and sit down to roll is you as the game master have to basically determine every time a player does an action, in which I should point out that this is a game where players do almost all of the rolling. You really never get to roll, right? You know, if players are fighting a monster, right? That's you know, just their role. The monster, you never roll, but you get to determine two things, and those things are simply described as effect and position. Effect is it, you know, tier 1, 2, 3, limited, standard, or great, right? If the players are fighting a giant ghost-powered colossus, maybe their effect against it is limited. If they're fighting a bunch of low-level thugs, maybe their effect is great. The system has a bunch of complicated tier levels that you can compare to, you know, determine this precisely, or you can kind of just wing it and say, okay, is this standard, or is this great, or is this limited? And then you also have to determine something that applies usually generally to the entire heist or operation, which is position. Are the players in kind of a advantageous position, or are they in like a risky position, or are they in a desperate position? Effect determines what's the consequence of their action. And position determines kind of, so Rob's right that the standard roll is always 6 is a unmitigated success, 4 to 5 is a partial success, 1 to 3 is oh shit. But the level of consequences depend on your position. Where if you're in an advantageous position, you know, a 1 to 3 isn't so bad. If you're in a risky position, it's incredibly bad, like as in your player might die, or your player character might die.
Right. And this is where things are a little bit nebulous, but also where I think the system does a very good job of modeling heists, combat, striving of any sort. You know, like Matt said, if you're trying to fight a literal demon, you know, a creature with the strength of 100 men, invincible skin that can shoot lightning from its eyes, it does not matter how many 6s you roll. It probably isn't going to do much unless you also have accumulated a bunch of advantages, like you have the aid of a very powerful whisper, or you've done some sort of occult ritual to weaken the demon.
You've got that demon slaying knife of +3, and then in this game, what that means is, when you do an action with that, it's at the standard position, or the advantageous position.
And this is just, I think, a very
effect. Sorry,
effect. Right.
See, this is a mistake you'll make. Is
you will make this
position
mistake a lot if you run this, but
right.
This is I think a very simple way of dealing with what in other games is CR or other sorts of, you know, challenge levels. It's just a very simple, do the players have any chance of accomplishing this thing? Are they operating at a equal level to whatever it is that they're opposing? That sort of thing. So that's all you really need to know about the dice rolling. There's
Well, I'll mention one other thing. There's 3 other types of rolls, and they're super simple, but one is really cool. The first one that is really cool is the resistance roll. Is when the dungeon master gives players damage. The dungeon master never gives players like hit point damage, called stress in this. Players always choose to take that, but that's a limited resource. The dungeon master gives them harm, which could be
that's
like
also
a permanent.
used to push yourself or to help others.
Yeah.
It's a very valuable, but limited resource.
Right. You're constantly spending it and constantly wishing you had more. The dungeon master gives you harm, which is like, voices are filling your head from this ghost you interacted with. Or, it could just be simple as like you get gut stabbed, right?
Yeah.
And anytime the dungeon master does that, the player can resist with a resistance roll, which is based on basically like how diversified you are in the 3 main skill groupings, the 3 main attributes. So it pays off not to be too specialized. You roll a number of dice, you take the highest one, and you can reduce the harm by that much. Or 6 stress, you reduce it by the number you rolled on the dice. So this is a fun thing in that it really empowers your players to refuse anything you say, right? If, they wade into a bunch of, into the middle of a gang war and they're like, I'm going to take people out. And, Dungeon Master says, oh, okay, you get punched. And they're like, no, I don't. Then they can show how they don't get punched, but they're going to burn through their stress really, really quickly.
Yeah. And this is the brilliance of the system and the way that it is much more a negotiation between the GM and the players. You, like Matt said, you do not call for a roll. You say, what do you want to accomplish and how are you going to do that? And then the player will pick from one of their 12 actions, which really love this. Some people I think are going to hate this, and but they're abstracted. There's no melee weapon skill. There's skirmish. There's finesse. There's hunt. There's prowl. And under all of these categories fall some obvious, some not so obvious things. But instead of doing a very precise thing, you will describe how it is that you are trying to overcome whatever obstacle it is. And then you have a chance to sort of decide how that goes based on your rolls, based on whether or not you resist, based on whether or not you take stress, that sort of thing.
And what I love about this is the skill system can literally just be the list of words on your character's table. There's like more detailed descriptions in the book, but you can kind of go either way. You can have your players read those like 12 paragraphs on the 12 skills, or you can just have them use these very clear single words about what each one does. Amazing.
And I gotta admit, I'm one of those people that's like, give me 100 different skills. I love it. I love the stupid big long list of skills in other RPGs, but I must admit this works just as well. That this you don't really need it if you've done a good enough job of abstracting general activities into groups, and this does a really good job of it. Just about everything that you would want to do will fall into one of these categories, especially if you're sticking to heists. And this allows for a lot of flexibility with your players, but it also means that you both have to sort of work together to decide how the narrative is going to progress. Players
always choose what the skill roll is or what the trait or ability they're using is. But, I've never had in my one time running this, and Rob, I don't know if you have had a player really gaming the system because the narrative is so strong, right? There's no, the players are asked explicitly in the rules, yeah, sure, you have 3 dots in command, but you need to make sure what you're doing is actually commanding. Choose, if you can't describe it as a command, then you better pick a different thing. I've never had a player weasel their way out of this.
I also have never had a player, I sometimes they bend it a bit, but for the most part,
that's good. That's good.
Yeah, that's exactly what we want. But I think it encourages exactly that, to get creative, not to lie or break the rules or be a weasel, as the book refers to it, but to get creative with what they're doing. So
there's a couple other minor types of rolls I wanted to detail. There's just a system for making a pure chance roll if you ever have to do that as a dungeon master. The system for gathering info for a heist is a little bit different than actual rolls during the heist, but it uses the same, basic traits and stuff like that. And then the one roll that you always get to make as the dungeon master is the engagement roll, which is after players have come up with a heist and a plan, you basically tell them how good you think their plan is.
Yes.
And this will determine starting position, advantageous, or risky, or desperate.
And this brings us to the gameplay loop, which is, now that you sort of understand how everything is resolved, it's all very simple. Everything happens with 6s. The gameplay loop, and it's a heist. It's the Italian Job. It's Ocean's 11. It's any number of, well, it's Snatch. It's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, sort of, and it's your players. You really, honestly, don't give them a bunch. They know their position, right? Your crew, the player's crew, has a territory somewhere in the city. They have rival gangs. There's areas around them they can try to expand to, but really the world is their oyster. You can roll on a table of rumors and of events so that maybe they have something to trigger their imagination or something to work toward, but they'll really just decide what it is that they want to do. Do they want to try to, do some sort of elaborate con job? Do they just want to rob somebody? Do they want to try to hijack a carriage as it's going past their hideout? And
do they want to go out in an all-out war with another gang, right? Do they want a Gangs of New York style put on their fancy hats and have everyone tie a blue armband around their arm? And this works. All of these work in this system. All of these
things are easily accomplishable in the setting, and so they'll come up with a plan. And this is this. So Matt,
this is what the plan looks like, right? You start. Well, okay, you can start anywhere. You could start the session with a heist beginning, but if let's say you're starting at the point on the loop of free play, this is where you can have character scenes, same actions and consequences, finding out information about your target, and free play ends when the players choose a target and choose a plan. Right? A plan should have who's our target and what's the detail we have in going after that. And then that's where you step in, make your engagement roll. You switch to the score, which is actions and consequences again in the heist, which can include flashbacks into the prep. You don't do all your heist prep, unlike, let's say, Shadowrun, before the actual heist. No, it happens in the middle of the heist with flashbacks. And then after the score is over, you go to downtime, in which players get their payoff. They deal with heat they pulled out, entanglements. They have to go smoke fantasy ghost weed to deal with their problems.
They gotta go visit their brothels or go gambling or, go to a fight club to expel their, their stress. Because for the most part, they don't take physical damage, and healing that is much more complicated. No, they need to resolve the stress of doing a heist and dealing with ghosts and things like that.
So that's the loop: free play, engagement roll, score, downtime, back to free play.
I want to talk about planning and engagement because I think this is so great. Because if you are a DM for a regular bog standard D&D group, you are probably familiar with the infinite planning problem. Whereas if you give your players a dungeon or an enemy or anything to solve and you just let them go, they will spend an hour or more, maybe the entire session, talking about what to do if you don't stop them. And
Rob, this is the complaint, your number one Dungeon Master complaint since we started this show 9 years ago. I remember our first couple episodes, you're like, I got a problem with my players over-planning. Is this just
a me thing?
They just won't start.
Is this
No, it's not you. It's everyone has this problem, but it's your favorite problem.
It is my favorite problem. It is my most recurring problem. I have had this with many, many groups. And the great thing about this is that it deliberately relieves that pressure. Two different ways. One, like Matt said, in the flashbacks, if your players forget something and they're like, oh, I wish I wanted to have planned for this, there's a system for that. A really good mechanical system. You take a little stress, you go back. And this also, if you have seen an Ocean's movie or The Italian Job or whatever,
I've never have.
You're familiar with this trope, right? Something goes wrong and there's like a they go back and suddenly you realize that they had left themselves a bag of tools in the air duct, or this is a decoy, and it's great, it's brilliant. Your players will know exactly what to do, but also you're given just enough to get started, or you're encouraged to say, there's 6 different types of type of plan: assault, deception, stealth, occult, social, transport. You don't have to follow this, but it gives sort of a structure. And then so the players just need to come up with a type of plan and a detail, which is basically like the point of attack or the social connection. And that's it. You're like, just enough time to be like, all right, what's the basic approach? And then you work it out as you go. And we're going to the captain's ball to murder the head of one of the guilds, and we're dressed as waiters. That's right. We're gonna hijack the Leviathan captain's carriage as he passes through Crowsfoot, and we're going to run up alongside on horses. Goats. I think all the horses are dead. I think all the horses are dead. They definitely don't have horses. Sorry. Electro buggies or something. Doesn't matter. Just on foot. Maybe they have horses. I don't know. They can have horses if you want to have horses. Yeah. Anyway. And that's it. You just, and then you decide what you're carrying and a couple of other minor things. And then the engagement roll that Matt mentioned happens, which is great, which is where you basically are like, okay, how good is this plan? Is it too complicated? Is it bold? Are you attacking somebody? You get bonus points for being bold, minus points for being too complicated. Yes. Which is, by the way, sorry, I talk about this all the time. I love it when mechanics support a certain type of play. And again, my players especially are very bad about, your plan is too complicated. Explain to me what it is you're trying to do. And if they know they're going to lose a die if their plan is too complicated for me to follow, they're going to have a simpler plan. And I think this is just like where it's a game we can play, where everyone can understand what's happening. That's right. Because players given a free hand will come up with the most contingent plan on Earth that will only have a 1 in 1,000 chance of succeeding. They will come up with this insane plan, and that can be fun. By the way, they can do that. Right. And if it's like a really good, complicated plan, like, you want to reward them for that. But if it's just like, you don't have to. It's your complete discretion, right? If you think it makes sense, stuff that might work, it's like, okay, that's fine. You can do that, but you're just going to roll 1 less dice, and you may be going into this with in a desperate position if you roll poorly. And this is just a great way to reward their actual knowledge of what's going on, both in character and in person. If, their plan is to, start a war with the gang that has more thugs and goons than their gang has, well, that you fucked up. You lose a die on that. But, if they're starting a war with a bunch of like weakling wizards that don't have any like brute force, well, then maybe they get an advantage for that. Or if they're going to war with the bigger gang, but they're doing it when the bigger gang is having a, no arms allowed meet with a different gang, and they're, trying to incite a conflict, you reward them for like coming up with a good idea. But if they're just like, we're gonna bust down the front door of this much more powerful enemy and go for it, well, it's like, okay, you can do that, but it's not gonna go well for you. The engagement role feels really good as a game master and as a player, because in lots of heist opportunities, if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons or Shadowrun, you don't feel rewarded for coming up with a good plan until it's over. That's part of the simulationist approach of Shadowrun and Dungeons & Dragons, and that's fine.
But in this, you are immediately rewarded if you came up with a really clever plan. Like Rob said, taking out the gang when they're at a truce meet. That's really clever. It's cool that you found out that was happening. You get a bunch of extra die on your engagement roll. Oh, good. Look, you're starting in an advantageous position.
It encourages players to both, as players, invest in planning and thinking and getting to know sort of the world and their enemies, but also as characters to invest in more than just combat, right? To invest in gathering information and to build up their list of contacts and allies, because this can make a huge difference in the engagement roll, which you can win or you can succeed in a heist with a bad engagement roll and you can fail with a good one, but it does set the tone and it makes a big difference. It will affect the way that a lot of your first rolls go. And this is just, it's so, I'm constantly impressed with how simple this is. It doesn't require a lot of rules. It's not very, of all the things, it's not actually all that difficult to run as a GM, but it rewards exactly what Matt said, good planning, which is the problem with that thing that I described just earlier, is that often those hours and hours of planning results in a bad plan because they're unsure of how it's going to go, and so they're unwilling to commit, right? And this is the problem with the simulationist game, is that you don't know how your plan is going to pan out until it's actually happened. But this allows you to sort of get immediate feedback and adjust on the fly, right? If your plan isn't great, but you can still jump back and, shore it up with flashbacks, then a lot of that planning pressure is taken off of your players.
Right. One thing I will say, because of the flashback system, because players can move around in both time and space during the heist, the only thing that will tell you when it's time to end the score is when the players are fucking scared for their lives, right? And so basically, this is a game where you, and maybe I did it wrong the time I ran this, but it seems like you gotta keep cranking things up to 11 if you keep doing this. Otherwise, there's not a lot of incentive to end the heist. Players like poking around and explore. If you have players that like opening every chest and stuff like that, but eventually the stress, players run out of stress. Players start to pick up some actual harm or trauma, and they want to get out and say this is over. So the players get to end it too, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, the players have a lot of control over, I guess, when
basically everything,
but especially when the heist is over. So yeah, we discussed the planning and the engagement, and the score is exactly what we said. It's just the actual playing out of the heist, which is probably the most ordinary and recognizable part of the game, except for the flashbacks, which allow for a lot of, like Matt said, you're operating both in 4 dimensions, time and space.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's and lots, the downtime is really interesting. There's lots, of course, games with downtime. D&D has been incorporating a lot more, but downtime is critical to Blades in the Dark, because that's where you, of course, deal with your stress and wounds, but it's also when players do projects, when they work with other factions or try to reduce the overall attention that they're getting from law enforcement. It's when a bunch of critical parts of character and crew development happen.
Right.
And
it's where you really flesh out your world and, okay, what are the consequences of your heist? What relationships have changed? And it's also the part where, if your players love, we love building a kingdom or a fun pirate ship, you're doing that during this time, right?
And I gotta say, aside from maybe I guess Kingmaker, it's hard for me to come up with a better, I don't want to say nation building or, but building really getting the feel of growing your little power base into something significant. Blades in the Dark does this really, really well. You start out absolute dog shit. You're, a nobody in a town full of nobodies, and you have a chance, and it's not easy. You will get your ass kicked by a lot of the more powerful people around you, but to grow and expand your territory, and they're really interesting and good rules for expanding, like good mechanics, genuine mechanics for if you expand here, you get bonuses to these types of engagements. If you expand here, your cohort is a little bit more powerful, or you have access to these resources. Nothing game breaking, but enough to give some direction and texture to your overall growth as a gang, basically, but as a crew and as a faction.
Right. So the character classes in this game will look familiar to anyone who's played a Powered by the Apocalypse game. They're in nice little playbooks where you can basically create your character by just looking at the playbook and filling some things out, which is wonderful because you, for the most part, I noticed for some of the classes that could craft things or have specific like vials or spells, they may need to look something up. But most part, everyone doesn't need the book to make their character sheet. You just need the free printouts. So the character classes, I think, are fine. They're like, you've got your fighty guy, you got your hunter gal, you got your, weird mage, you've got your alchemist, you got a lot of social classes. But what I think really sets this game apart is what Rob is talking about, which is the crew classes, right? You also, as everyone is making characters, you need to, as a group, decide what are your, why are your characters together and what is your purpose? Are you smugglers? Are you like a street gang? Are you, I'm forgetting, so are you assassins?
A cult? Are you hawkers? Are you like a drug gang? You a vice gang? Do you sell drugs and prostitution? Are you your standard mafia type of gang, or are you more of like a thieves guild? Are you are you
fighting specialists? Are you bravos?
Yes. Are you bunch of again, gangs of New York style, just street toughs?
Are you spies?
Smugglers is a great one. Yeah, like again, these are things that fit really well into Doskvol, and then your crew is its own character that starts with territory, that gains XP, that acquires contacts and upgrades and territory, and also your sort of the members of your gang that are not you grow and become more powerful as well. And this, in D&D and in other games, this is often an extra layer of bookkeeping that can be fun or unfun, kind of depending on your group and their interest in it. I remember that in, about half of the Kingmaker games I played, players loved it, and the other half they were like, I don't care about any of this stuff. Let's get back to the hex crawl, which was fine, but it's really easy in Blades in the Dark, and it's a really important part of the gameplay. It's the progression and growth and position of your crew, especially related to other factions, is really important, and it's really engaging, and it's really easy to work with. It doesn't feel like a chore.
Right. And all the crews get like fun little sheets where they can sort of see their empire grow, kind of like a little tech tree or like Diablo style trait.
Yeah, it's like a skill
progression.
Tree. It's cool.
Yeah,
it's fun. Yeah,
it's fun, but it can also, it's not exactly physical, but you can almost imagine your influence as a crew growing like a spider as we acquire informants and our own secret passageway, and of course turf where we collect rent from, because the city is just crime all the way to the top.
Crime all the way up. Yeah, and it really
your lair gets cool and stuff.
Yeah, it really adds some both mechanical but also flavor, texture to your crew and to the gang. And there's very, very precise and very good rules for like your relationship to law enforcement, to other gangs. It's one thing I found when running my game is that it's pretty hard for the players to expand and to continue to operate without eventually going to war with one of the gangs that's in the area around them. Like, it's just sooner or later, just by virtue of expansion, they are going to upset one of the existing power players. And, at least once in one of my recent sessions, they've been in all-out war with one of the gangs in their area that they had to deal with that. They had to,
Yeah. And this is, I think, maybe I've saved it for last. One of the most important points about Blades in the Dark is, as a game master, all you have to do is get your players started, right? And then everything else kind of flows from their interest in actions and, of course, most importantly, the consequences of those actions, right? They're going to piss some people off, and they're going to have to deal with that. They're going to have a thing they want to accomplish as a crew, and there will be obstacles in their way.
And this is, now that I've been on both sides of this, the reason why I get so excited about Blades in the Dark is because it really encourages, but also makes easy role playing. Is that it gives players, especially, but also GMs, the tools that they need to motivations to what they want to accomplish. It makes it a lot simpler and encourages people to start to think about their characters, start to think about their goals, start to look for things that they want. And it has gotten a lot of my players, or has given them the opportunity to really come into their own as RPG players and as role players, and they've been having a lot of fun with it because it provides...
I was talking to one of your I mentioned to one of your players that I ran this game to for you, and she could not shut up about her game. She became that annoying person in the local gaming store who wants to tell you about their D&D game. Of course, I was actually interested, so it wasn't annoying for me, but she could not shut up about all the things that is happening and were happening in her game. It's a rich inner life,
and that
players will have.
The players, that's because the players get to drive, and it's not hard for... It's not, they don't have to do any GM prep. They don't have to, they just have to be like, my character wants to get rich, or my character wants revenge on her shitty ex-husband, or whatever. And, everything is sort of like driving toward that goal. Or my character wants to build this crime syndicate up to as big as it can get. And I provide, you as the GM provide them with sort of a scenario, and they make it happen. And it's great. I think that this is a really good system for encouraging beginning role players to come out of their shell a bit. This is one of the downsides that I think we'll talk, or we're already...
Well, we should quickly add, just to be fair, do we have any critiques of this
Yes,
system?
I do. And a lot of them are my critiques as a GM, but I was just going to say, one issue is that it's really hard to do a one-shot in Blades in the Dark because so much of it is about the downtime and about the relationship to other factions and to the city and about growing your crew. This is, kind of a tepid criticism, but it sucks. It's a fun game to play, and it's just kind of, at least a third of it is inaccessible if you're only going to play one time.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like necessarily a bad thing, right? Because that's also its strengths. But yeah, it's not, listen, if you were doing a one shot, maybe not this system. I would say that, it can be difficult to prep for as a dungeon master. And you kind of have a lot riding on how you're going to open things. But of course, you can't prep that really at all until you see what kind of characters and crew your players are building. So like your session 0 will not take that long. That'll take an hour or less. But while your players are making characters, you also need to be furiously scrabbling notes about what you think might happen.
I'll have a lot more criticisms.
It's a very stressful hour.
When we get to the GM section, but more generally, I love... this is a choice, so this isn't really a criticism, but because so much of the rolling is kind of subjective, there's a lot of room for... Let me say it differently. There can be a lot of room for disagreement. If everybody's on the same page, usually this doesn't happen. But there is not a lot of, you can't really go to the rule book and say, well, you rolled this and the enemy's armor class is this, so you missed. Sorry. You have to say, well, you were in a desperate position and... blah, 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 blah. Again, for the most part, this has not been my experience, but there is a lot of subjectivity in this system, which, like I said, is a choice, and it's not better or worse, but this is something that, especially if your players are used to something like D&D, where there are pretty concrete rules for whether or not something works or doesn't work can be an issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's something you have to be in the forged in the dark mindset for.
Yes.
So like get yourself in that mindset and then things will go well. If you're not in that mindset and your players are not in that mindset, you gotta bring them into line with groupthink. And I guess my one critique is clocks. Clocks, Rob.
I don't love the clocks either. I like them
clocks
in theory.
are from
In practice, I don't actually use them that much, but I don't know.
Here's the deal.
on
Clocks are like one of the things that is ported like straight from Apocalypse World games or those types of games. That's where the clock was invented by the Bakers, or I think that's their name. The point is, this is an incredibly well-written RPG. One of the best I think I have ever read. You definitely need to read it cover to cover. It's fun. It's easy to read. But like when you get to the end, you're like, wait a second. I got all these things to keep track of. When am I supposed to turn a clock? These are supposed to be things that drive players to action of basically telling them that something big is coming, good or bad, right? And you can kind of set how many ticks go in it, and they're just kind of a big abstraction. And definitely in that fuzziness, I was often wondering, when do I start a new clock? When do I tick this clock? When, like, I don't know. This is too much. I'm panicking about the clocks. Maybe that's me just being new at the system.
A lot of the time I'm filling in the clocks, and my players are like, why are you filling that in? And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like it. But,
yeah.
I mean,
fuck you. That's why.
I give them
I'm
a
the
reason,
clock man.
but for the most part, I'm like, I don't know. This feels like a good time to add a tick to that clock, I guess.
Right.
I don't know. This is a general critique. Again, I think it's good. I actually think this is good practice for me and for a lot of players who are used to concrete rules. Some things are abstracted to the point where it's a little bit stressful on both sides to try to deal with it. But it is a problem. It is something that you may have to deal with, especially if your players are looking for certainty and they're used to concrete rules. It is not something that can't be overcome. There are plenty of weird rules in D&D that do require DM adjudication, despite what they would like you to believe. But it can be an issue. It is. Yeah. And it introduces a different type of complexity, by the way. Just because there aren't a bunch of rules to memorize, your players have to be they genuinely have to be a lot more creative and imaginative. They have to be able to think outside the box. You're in a cellar. There's a noble's house above you. How are you getting into it? And they may not have a lot of ideas about that. I think over time they will come into their natural creativity, and the game provides a lot of encouragement for how to think about that. But this can be quite complicated, especially when you start talking about flashbacks and about all the different things that go into the heist, all the things that are happening at once. So I don't want to, oversell this. It is complicated and a bit challenging in its own way, but I think that it's very, very, I think it's a lot of fun for the most part.
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of fun too. I wish I had more advice on when to tick a clock and when not to tick a clock.
No, I don't know either. If somebody figures it out, let me know. I made it up. Yeah.
I mean, all it says, it's the GM's job to tick a clock so it reflects the fictional situation. Like, it's definitely one of those things that you, after play, I'm sure slowly get better at, but it's always like a question of like when to make a clock or not. Like, I definitely fucked up. Like, the players did something that clearly needed a clock, right? They pissed off a faction that was going to come for them. They made that choice. I'm like, okay, but that's not going to happen immediately. They're dealing with other things. This is the perfect situation for a clock. And then I wasn't sure what to do with it after that. So,
yeah.
Anyway, the layout's beautiful. The binding is nice. The game comes
awesome. Yeah.
The art is simple but great, especially in the city section where each neighborhood has some simple drawings. Giving it the feel. Online, you can print off a player's guide that gives players really everything they need. There's also a nice Dungeon Master reference that is
there's
4
a really
pages
good
long.
SRD and a bunch of free resources. This is again, I think this should be the bare minimum for all games, but almost all the rules are available. If you want the pretty nice book, you got to pay for it, and I think that's totally fair, but there's a bunch of free resources. So check
there's
that out.
a lot of integration for Roll20.
Yes.
It is, you can tell, Rob, that I guess just as a concluding thought from me, that this game was written by a person or a team of people, I'm not sure how many people worked on, who have definitely played games like me and put all the things that I wish I had when I was playing a game, like a free print off of the basic rules the players need that is actually useful, but also has their character abilities, so they don't have to take my fucking rule book.
This is kind of an insane thing to say, but it feels like they actually run games. Like I know for a fact that the people who write D&D are DMs, but for some reason they do not seem to really be like aware of the actual challenges of running a game and
like logistical challenges.
Yeah, Blades in the Dark absolutely is. It's so sorry, I have this gripe about just about every book we've read. I never had trouble finding anything. It's intuitive, and I don't know how to really like put my finger on this, but like I knew where to go in the book to look for things. On top of like what you just described, having all the print offs and all the right things in the right places, it's clearly designed for somebody who actually wants to use it to run games.
Right. I couldn't find the poisons for a while,
that was
that was one miss, and batting 900 on the rest. I imagine the people at like, I don't know, other game companies, when they play their game, they sit at like their mahogany conference table in their offices in Renton, Washington, and everyone has a stack of all three game books in front of them and like an iPad and stuff like that. And they're like, wait, what? Why would we need to have a free print off of the character classes and their abilities?
That's right.
They'll just use their manual. I'm like, fucking players don't have a game manual. So of the people we have played with for years, right? How many of them, Rob, own a player's handbook for 5e?
Oh, I'm sorry. I would say
zero.
No, of my group, if I take my like largest group, maybe of 12 players, regular players, there are 2 players' handbooks.
Yeah,
one is mine. You know that, and this includes some people who buy all the books because they just like having them. You know, it's just
right.
The players' handbooks. There's just you're absolutely right. People who have been playing the same edition for 7 years never bothered to buy a handbook.
Rob, just 1 second. Excuse me. Can I just borrow your book? I need to look up a spell real quick. Rob, sorry.
All right, everybody, check out Blades in the Dark. We're going to talk more about the GMing section because it's really, really good, and we'll talk a bit more about the challenges of running a game and what we learn from it. But it's a great system. I encourage you to play it. It would be great if your D&D group needs like a 2 or 3 week break to just try this out. It's so good. Read it. It's fun.
And if you're John Harper, contact us, and we're happy to give you the graphics, the JPEG or the PNG for the Dungeon Master of None seal of approval, so you can reprint all for your next printing of the hardcovers. Because I know you'll want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to provide our official, seal of approval. So, thanks everybody for listening. As always, if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at dmofnone@gmail.com, add us on Twitter at dmofnone, leave a rating, review, like, and subscribe, etc., so on and so forth. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
I twisted you over and under to take you. The coals went so wild as they swallowed the rest. I twisted you under and under to break you. I just couldn't breathe with your throne on my chest all